Narva is one possibility, the Suwalki Gap is another possibility. So therefore, the Suwalki Gap is as well a risk as Narva, for instance, or Spitsbergen is. So it might be that Russia chooses the Suwalki Gap to test NATO's unity.
Witam Państwa w kolejnym odcinku naszego programu Świat według Polski, w którym staramy się pokazać, jak wydarzenia na całym świecie wpływają na Polskę i nasze życie w naszym kraju na co dzień. Dzisiaj Państwa i moim specjalnym gościem jest profesor Carlo Masala, jeden z największych i najważniejszych analityków wojskowych w Niemczech, który właśnie napisał książkę o tym, jak będzie wyglądać możliwa konfrontacja wojskowa między Rosją a NATO. Mr. Professor, thank you for finding time for this interview.
Thanks for having me on your show.
So you wrote a book about the possible military confrontation between the NATO and Russia. Can you tell us briefly about this scenario? Why you choose these parts in this scenario?
Well, actually, the basic idea was that I think that Russia is going to test NATO's unity, political unity, and therefore Russia will basically choose a way of limited risk for Russia themselves, and will choose what Churchill called a soft underbelly of NATO. And there are a couple of soft underbellies. This is a Spitsbergen, for instance. This is a city with a Russian minority in the Baltic states. And I decided to go for the Narva scenario, which is a city in Estonia, close to the Russian border, which I think more than roughly 40% of its inhabitants with a Russian passport. And with a combination of hybrid measures and limited military attacks, it will basically conquer the city. And then pose to NATO the question, are you willing to risk a major military escalation between NATO and Russia, which always has a nuclear component, just for the liberation of one, in vertical commas, tiny city of 50,000 inhabitants? This is the scenario I chose.
So in your book, you wrote that after 3 years, some kind of ceasefire about the Ukraine and so on, Russia got this time to rebuild his capacity, military capacity. And as I understand, you estimate that after the peace agreement, ceasefire on Ukraine, Europe still will not very, in good position if we talk about the military preparation, yes. about the like really thinking about the real scale of the Russian threat. Why do you think about it?
Well, actually, let me say first, this is a fictional scenario. So in my fictional scenario, for instance, after Russia won the war in Ukraine, Putin basically steps back and a new Russian president comes in, which is a young figure, and he's trying to charm the West with several offensives and proposals for arms control and better relation and so on and so forth. So nothing in military terms is going to happen for a year or two. And my assumption is then the whole debate in Europe will relax a bit. Because, I mean, we're spending a hell of money on defense right now. And in a lot of European countries, Poland is an exception. But let's say in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, in France, probably the society will then ask, well, look, I mean, the Russians are not that much of a threat as you told us. So why do we have to spend that much money on defense and cut back on social welfare issues? So there will be a public debate, which basically will influence also governments. And thereby, I think that, this whole drive we have now in rearming Europe will slow down, which, of course, will give the Russians an opportunity.
And what about the Suwalki Gap? As you know, this is one of the, let's say, some kind of hotspot on the eastern flank of NATO. You also mentioned about this place in your fictional scenario. But do you think that the Suwalki Gap, this is the place where Russia and Belarus were trying to testing the NATO? Poland could, be victim of the possible hybrid invasion?
Well, as I said, I chose a scenario based on where are soft underbellies of NATO's frontiers. And of course, the Suwalki Gap is also a soft underbelly of NATO's frontier. So it's not that in my book, my message is not, it's going to be about Narva. Narva is one possibility. The Suwalki Gap is another possibility. So therefore, the Suwalki Gap is as well a risk as Narva, for instance, or Spitzbergen is. So it might be that Russia chooses the Suwalki Gap to test NATO's unity. Yes.
So how we can prepare as a NATO allies, as a whole European, let's say, community against the Russian aggressive policy? Because as I understand, you are one of the analysts who thought that the Russia didn't stop or don't stop because
yes, exactly.
They will.
Yeah. I mean, what we know from Russia, Russia has an imperial agenda. So it's not only about Ukraine, it goes beyond Ukraine. Russia wants to control parts of Eastern Europe again. So be it the Baltic states, probably Romania, probably Bulgaria. So Russia won't stop after the war in Ukraine. And if there is the impression that if there is the impression in Russia that Russia has won the war, it will fuel, of course, this kind of imperial ambition Russia has. So what do we need to do? I think there is a three-pronged approach we need to follow. The first is we need to rearm. We need really to basically become stronger in military terms. With the uncertainty of the fact whether the United States will be still a conventional security provider for Europe, we need to basically get the capabilities that usually the US provides for a large scale military attack to the Europeans, like air transportation, air refueling, ballistic missiles, which goes beyond the reach of 2,000 kilometers, and all this stuff we need to have. This is the first thing we need to rearm. Secondly, we need to work on our political unity. I mean, deterrence is based on, let's say, material you need, but deterrence is based on messaging, so that you make very clear, constantly clear, and you signal to the Russians that they should not even think about attacking 1 inch of NATO's territory because we are ready and we're willing to strike back. The third point, and there, let's say, Central and Eastern Europe is different than the rest of Europe. So my third point is more for the rest of Europe. We need to work on the resilience of our societies. Yeah, we need to basically work on the willingness of our societies to bear the price a potential military escalation with Russia will cost. And I'm not talking only about the human price in terms of fallen soldiers and wounded soldiers. I'm talking also about the political price and the economic price such a large-scale confrontation will basically entail. And we need to work on the resilience of our societies, because without resilient societies who are ready to pay the price, our armed forces won't be able to do their job if this kind of military escalation should occur in the future.
Could you tell us what is the current position, if you talk about the war in Ukraine, about the Russian invasion on Ukraine? That we are in the moment when the administration of Donald Trump trying to push Ukraine and Russia to some kind of deal agreement. Russia and Ukraine continue the drone attacks. What about the front line? What about the Russian plans? Because as we know, on the Antum, Russia and Belarus and other allied states preparing the big military drills in the Eastern Europe. So, what is your opinion about the current situation in the war in Ukraine, but also about the next months?
I mean, first of all, we have to see that basically Ukraine is withdrawing from Kursk. I mean, they're holding right now roughly 10% of the territory they used to hold a couple of months ago. So we have to expect that basically over the next past weeks, they are going to withdraw completely from Kursk. Interestingly, they are now able to stabilize the front in Luhansk and Donetsk. So which for couple of months looked very bad because Russia gained more and more territory. Now we have a situation where the Ukrainians are able more or less to stabilize the front over there. I expect that the war is going to continue. We have indications that Russia is planning for a major offensive after summer. Yeah, they're regrouping their armed forces in the east of Ukraine. So it looks very much like, I mean, no one has 100% guarantee, but it looks very much like that we have to expect a major offensive by summer or after summer, which basically also means that there will be no progress in the negotiations. Because we see in the negotiations, especially in the talks between the US and Russia, that Russia sets so many preconditions to agree to a permanent ceasefire that Russia has no interest in a permanent ceasefire, because Russia still thinks that it can gain more territory in Ukraine. So Russia is delaying the talks, basically. It's giving to Trump once in a while a small crumb so that Trump can sell this back home as a victory. But if you look at the overall pictures, they're delaying the talks because they want to continue the war from the point that they think that they can still gain more territory if they continue the war. So we have to expect, I would say, that until the end of the year, it's very early to say this, but let's say until autumn, there will be no progress rather than more military actions from Russia against Ukraine.
So what about the Donald Trump policy from your perspective, that his activities are trying to push to this some kind of peace agreement, it's like a little bit successful, or it's like completely false? Or what is the end game of the Donald Trump if you talk about the Europe, like the ending of the military activity of NATO, or maybe rewrite that the allies between the US and Europe?
I mean, I think the most important thing for Trump is that he can basically normalize the relations with Russia, especially in the economic realm. I personally don't think that Trump is really interested in Ukraine. So he wants, of course, to stop the war, because stopping the war is a precondition to normalize the relations with Russia. And the normalization with Russia is superior to every other goal. So this is one thing. The second thing is that for the Trump administration, it's very clear that Europe is no longer as important as it used to be. I mean, we had the Secretary of Defense a couple of weeks ago telling the European allies that the US is no longer the primary conventional security guarantor of Europe. We know from the leaked China memorandum that basically there is explicitly written, priority has China, deterring China, homeland defense. And if then things are still available, basically we could help the Europeans. But our perspective is that we need to confront the reality that if there is a conventional aggression by Russia, potentially we Europeans are on our own. There won't be any massive US support. So, and this more or less is the picture of the Trump administration.
So what about Poland? Because our government thought that we are perfectly prepared for any Russian threats. Our members of our activity, personnel in army rising. We buy a lot of equipment, especially from the US. But from your perspective, that the Polish army is really like some kind of the best student in the NATO class. Sometimes some of the US officials told something like that, or maybe you're looking on that in a completely different way.
No, how I look at Poland, and I must say I'm not an expert on the Polish armed forces, so but when I look at Poland and what happened over the past, let's say 3 years, this is huge. I mean, Poland used to be the country who always warned the other Europeans with regard to Russia and Russia's imperial ambitions. And Poland is the country in Europe which most consequentially draw the lessons from then the invasion and started really, basically to enlarge the personal basis of your army, huge weapons procurement. I mean, the deal you did with South Korea on tanks, this is huge. So Poland is really going into the right direction. And let's say, if this continues, I assume that in a couple of years from now, Poland will be the most important non-nuclear conventional country in NATO of the Europeans. Yeah. So you took the lessons, one has to say.
From the alternative scenario, you can imagine that maybe we will face in the next Cold War, like all of the experts, analysts say, maybe Russia will invade Baltics in the 3-4 years, but maybe will not invade in the next decades. Do you think it's possible that we will stay in the front of the Russia aggressive, but nothing will happen, or Russia is too aggressive or to push this agenda, hybrid threats and so on, that in the next 5 or 3 years something needs to be happening?
I mean, first of all, I would say Russia will be the number one threat for the years to come. As long as there is a regime in Russia which has neo-imperial ambitions, Russia will stay the number one threat, which has to be deterred and contained by the Europeans, and hopefully together with the US. Yeah. So this part, effectively deterring and containing Russia, might lead to the fact that Russia won't attack militarily one of its neighbors again. Yeah. But if Russia has the impression and the perception that Europe or NATO is not united in its view on Russia, and that there are countries, let's say like Poland, who are ready to basically deter and contain Russia, but others are a little bit vague about this, then of course the chances will increase that Russia is going to test NATO's unity, NATO's political unity militarily by waging a limited attack on one of its neighbors. So it's basically, you know, a quid pro quo. It depends very much on our actions whether Russia will attack one of its neighbors again or not.
So what about Germany? What we can expect from the new Chancellor Friedrich Merz and the new big coalition between the socialists and Hadek parties, that they're keeping this policy about the support in Ukraine in every way, or maybe trying to find some kind of deal with Russia too?
Let me make 3 remarks about the potential new German government, which is still not in power, so I say potential, but I think it will be the new German government. And first of all, if you look at the leading figures there, I mean, if you look at Friedrich Merz, the Christian Democratic future chancellor, if you look at the head of the Social Democratic Party, Lars Klingbeil, and if you look at the still current Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, with a view on Russia and Ukraine, they're very close. Yeah, they used to be also very close in the past government when the CDU was in the opposition. So they know that Russia is a threat, that you need to support Ukraine. Yeah. And of course, everyone wants to have an end to this war, but not to every price. So the end to this war should be one where basically Ukraine will be secure and safe for the potential future. So this is very clear. So if you look at the personnel, I think we're going to support Ukraine, and we are very clear on Russia. There is no drive to normalize the relationships with Russia among these 3 top-level politicians. Secondly, we made something which is highly controversial in Germany, because during the election campaign, especially the Christian Democrats promised not to do it, but we took defense spending out of the debt brake, which basically means, in theory, the next German government and even future governments, if they don't change it, can spend as much as it's necessary on defense. And this really destroyed the Gordian knot that we had over the past years, because it wasn't possible to increase the normal defense budget, yeah, out of the normal budget. So this coalition basically took it out of the debt brake, and now there is money available as much as we need. So this is a very clear indication where we are heading for. And therefore, I think we will get a German government who is really committed in, you know, the territorial integrity of Ukraine, that Ukraine will be a country in the future which can defend itself, and we will help by that. And we are very clear about the fact that Russia stays a threat for the foreseeable future, which has to be deterred and contained.
So, what about the future of NATO? Also, I know that you know a lot of experts, analysts that say that the future of this organization is not very positive. That the Donald Trump administration trying to maybe reduce number of the U.S. soldiers, especially on the eastern flank. That you think that the NATO will survive this turbulence, or maybe we will observe in the next year decline of the importance of NATO?
I mean, I would rather say we will observe in the next couple of years an even stronger Europeanization of NATO. Because, as I said, it's very clear the US doesn't want to be the primary conventional security provider for NATO any longer. So far, the US has reaffirmed its nuclear commitment to NATO, which is important. But in conventional terms, we will see a gradual withdrawal from NATO. I mean, there are rumors that, for instance, there is a reorganization of the combatant commands the US has worldwide, and that the future SACEUR, so the Supreme Allied Commander of all NATO forces in Europe, who traditionally is always an American general, because he's double-headed, he's also the commanding officer of all US forces in Europe, that this position will basically taken over by European, because the US doesn't want to have this position any longer. So what we will see is a Europeanization of NATO.
And I want to end our interview with a question about the nuclear umbrella under Europe. And do you think that this offer from France or UK about the replacing US, this is something good? You know, we can estimate that it could be happen, or it's, you know, it's like, this is like unreal scenario, and we need to base on the nuclear security from the US.
I would say that the debate, especially in France and in Great Britain, but also in Germany, is not about replacing the nuclear umbrella of the US. So far, the nuclear umbrella still exists. I mean, even Donald Trump has made it clear that the nuclear umbrella still exists. So it is to add a European umbrella to the existing nuclear umbrella of the US. And this is something we should do. Yeah, because if the US won't be conventionally present in Europe to such an extent as it used to be, of course, the question arises, why should the US risk the destruction of New York for the liberation of Tallinn, for instance? It doesn't make much sense. So we need a stronger European component added to the nuclear component of the US. Yeah. If the US withdraws its nuclear umbrella from Europe, then the problems will be massive. And it's not that easy to replace the nuclear umbrella of the US. So this is where a lot of people who are basically raising their voice that the nuclear umbrella of the US has to be replaced, have very little knowledge about the problems and difficulties to do this just among the Europeans. So for the time being, we should stick to, is it possible to have additionally to the US nuclear umbrella, a European, French, British nuclear umbrella? And I think this is possible.
And do you think that the Germany could get the nuclear weapon very easily? As I know that some of the people in Germany starting discussion about it, or is like political fiction?
No, it's a political fiction. I mean, especially for Germany, you know, I mean, first of all, we're a member of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, so which basically means we would have to get out of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. This is possible. But the consequences for the rest of the world will be huge, because for the last 60 years, we were the strongest supporter of the NPT. But even more important, we have to basically reverse the 2+4 treaty on German unification, because there we reaffirmed in 1990 that Germany will not possess or develop nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. So for Germany, it would be extremely difficult to produce or to buy its own nuclear weapons. So therefore, this is rather political fiction than reality.
Thank you very much for this very interesting interview. Państwa i moim gościem był profesor Carlo Masala, niemiecki analityk wojskowy, autor książki o tym, jak mogłaby wyglądać wojna pomiędzy NATO a Rosją. Mr. Professor, thank you very much for this interview.
Thanks for having me in your show.